All right, so here is a circle, and here is a sphere. But wait a minute, we can't really tell the difference. Okay, so let me help you out some. Okay, this is much better. So now here is a circle, and here is a sphere. Oh, but wait a minute. They still look the same. How about that? Does that help? Circle, sphere, not so much. One's just green and one's still white. So let me see if there's something else I can do to this. Okay, so how about this? Again, circle, sphere. So what's the difference between this one and the other one? This is still green, this is still white, and the difference, of course, is the shading. And the shading is done in a curved pattern. So if you shade an object curved lines, it's going to look round. It could be a cylinder or anything like that, but that's going to look round. If I had just cut this in half and made half of it dark green and the other half light green, it would still be very flat. It would just have two different colors. And so now it's curved. It's got that shading that's curved, and that's what we're going to do on those other spheres. But right now we're just going to draw and paint, let it dry, and then next week we'll do the shading. So here's what we're going to make. We're going to take those spheres and just make them a pile of spheres. In this case, I made ornaments. But you can see how these curved shadows help make these look three-dimensional like spheres. And the shadows underneath on the table help a little bit. And even these little curved tops help also. And so these make it look like a pile of three-dimensional spheres instead of just two-dimensional flat circles. I'm going to break this down into little tiny steps just like we always do, so it'll be really simple. Okay, the first step is just to draw the spheres. So I'm going to give you 3 circles, small, medium, and large, so you can kind of choose a variety to make them, to trace around them. Nobody can draw a perfect circle. So this is going to help us out a little bit because all you have to do is trace. And we're going to think a little bit about placement. So let me show you about that. So if we look at this, it's a pile of spheres. The indication is that these smaller ones on top are sitting on top of other spheres that might be behind it that we can't even see. I like to use maybe one big one and then the rest medium and small around it. Otherwise it gets too big. The Japanese always like to use odd numbers, so I would use like 5. In this case, we have 7, and that's nice too. Odd numbers just lend themselves to a more haphazard pile of spheres rather than an organized 2 by 2 by 2 even numbers. So just think about that whenever you're doing your artwork. 3, 5, 7, those are always really good numbers when you're arranging objects. So here's my thought process. I'm going to start maybe with one large one. I hate to always put that large one right smack in the middle, so I'm going to put it off center a little bit. I also don't want it all the way down here on the bottom edge of the page. So I'm going to bring it up so that I have a little bit of the table back there, and I'll just trace around it. This one's going to be a large sphere in the foreground of my picture. Then I can start arranging these other ones around it. Now, I have to understand that if this sphere is behind this one, then it would start and stop at that line. So I can start at that line and trace around it and have it stop again at that one. That indicates that this sphere is behind this sphere. Here's the other thing you need to think about. If it's behind it, then it cannot be lower on the picture plane. That doesn't make sense. So you can't have one that is behind the other one and yet closer to the viewer. This tells the viewer that this one's in the foreground and this one's in the background. However, this overlapping tells the viewer the opposite, that this one's in the background, this is in the foreground. So you get this confusion. Sometimes people don't know why this is wrong, but they certainly look at it and right away they'll say, there's something up with that drawing. That doesn't make sense. And it has to do with the level on the table. If it's truly behind, then it has to be higher on the picture plane. All right? All right, so I can put another one here that's behind this one. Again, I'll start here, go around, and stop. It's higher and it's behind. That makes sense. I could put another one over here, start right there, go around and stop. It's higher than this one and behind. That makes sense. And I could start stacking them up. Now, here's where we get into trouble too. Some people will put one sphere right on top of the other one. Well, logically, again, that doesn't make sense because we understand that this is a round sphere and it's going to roll. So because of gravity, we know that this would roll down that pile until it hits the other one, or it would roll the other way till it hits the other one. So to have that just precariously stacked right on top doesn't make sense to your viewer. Here's another thing that's a problem, is people putting them up here. They're just floating in space and not touching anything. So that is going to be an issue too. You want to make sure that it comes down and nuzzles right into a nice secure place or even below it. So the indication is that there's another sphere behind it holding it up. And you can trace from corner to corner and you have that one stacked on top of the other. So you have to use a little bit of brain work. Okay, that's 3 little ones. Let's get one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I guess I have to do 2 more, don't I? So maybe I'll put this medium one over here. Oh, here's another thing people do. They'll have this one out here. So again, logic tells us that gravity is going to pull this down onto the table. You can't just have it stacked out there. You have to kind of step back. Seems like I'm going to need another one over here somewhere. Let's throw another medium in there. What do you say? And we'll go right around there. Okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Looks pretty good. And just to settle everything down so they don't look like they're floating in space, I'm going to give it a ground line. I'm just going to move right through here, behind, 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 and sneak right back out the back. So it looks like I have a wall, table, and spheres stacked on top of each other. Okay, and just for the heck of it, I did one that's completely wrong. So let's look at this. Large sphere on the very bottom edge of the paper. We ask that you not do that. Here's a medium sphere in front of the large sphere, and yet, look it's further away from the viewer. So my brain is telling me this one's further away, but this overlapping is telling me no, it's not, it's closer. Doesn't make sense. Placed in a perched in a place where it's going to roll off. Again, perched in a place where it's going to roll off. And floating in space. We have no idea what that's going on right there. Then look where the ground line is. The ground line is way down here, which means that all of these are floating in space. They're not setting on the table. So think about all of those kind of things. This is really a brain activity. It looks like you're just tracing 5 to 7 circles, but this is a brain activity. You're going to have to think, which means draw lightly so you can erase. There's going to be erasing, especially when you get some overlapping going on here, and that's okay. We're supposed to erase. So draw super light. All right, so the next step might be if you would like to make ornaments out of your spheres, then you want to put these little tops on them. And they're really pretty easy, but the trick is to make them curved. A lot of times people will just put a straight rectangle on there, and again, a straight line on a curved object makes it look flat and 2-dimensional. Curved lines are going to make it look 3-dimensional, and that's what we want. So if we go over to our spheres, then you're going to want to bring one of those little ornaments up, but curve that line, and then curve this one also, so that they're parallel. This line is parallel to this line. And then you'll just connect it, kind of like a little football right there on top. So you're making a little football shape with those curved lines, all right? I like to go ahead and give it a little bit of texture. And then sometimes people like to put that little piece of wire in there like it's a hook. And you can actually put these in any kind of direction. It really doesn't matter because they're just in a pile. Remember, they're just spheres kind of stacked up in a pile. So we'll make that little football shape, give it some texture right there, and then maybe put that little hooked wire through there. All right. Some of them may be upside down and not even have a hook on them, and that's okay. But you're going to want to just put those little things on there if that's your desire. You don't have to. We can just leave them as regular spheres. They could be a bunch of tennis balls stacked on top of each other, or, you know, just bouncy balls like the balls my dog has that he plays with all the time. So kind of think about that. All right. Then once you get everything just the way you want it, you're going to outline with a thin Sharpie. Make sure that you understand which is overlapping which so that you don't Sharpie that line right there. Really do some good erasing so that you understand what's going on before you get in there. And then you're going to very carefully just use that one line to Sharpie outline. So you can see under there is that line from the sphere. I'm not going to outline that because the top of it right here overlaps that sphere. So I will end up erasing that little line in the end. Just take your time and make sure you understand which object or which line is in front of the other, okay? And just outline it, including your ground line right there. So you just not one thin, nice line on everything, and then you're going to erase. Now, some people like to put these extra hooks on there. That's fine. I can show you how to do that. So here I have the hangers on them, and you would have to put a hook on it. But the hooks are kind of funny too. They're not going to just stick straight up into the air because they are not welded into place. They're loosey-goosey. They're just through those pieces of wire. So gravity, again, is going to tend to pull them down. So you need to think about where that little hook is going to be. And with the hooks, I end up making it almost like an S. So here's an S, but I stretch it out kind of longer. And usually on those hooks, one end of it is a little bit smaller and the other end of it is a little bit bigger. Like this small end would go around the ornament and the big end would go around the tree branch on when you're hanging it up. So you can kind of see what my thought process is there. So for example, on this one, if I wanted to put one on there, I might start with that little loop right there and then have the big loop just kind of hanging down this way. Again, with this one, the same thing, little loop on the top, big loop might be hanging down this way. All right, this one could hang on the table. This one, you can tell, might have the little loop on top, and then the big one resting on that sphere itself. So you can kind of think about them. This one over here might just dingle-dangle right in the air. So you can put the little one and then the big one. All right, so think about that. If you want to add those on, that's fine. If you want to just put some on a couple, that's fine, and then leave these blank, that's fine too, because my hooks fall off all the time. All right, so everything is outlined and my pencil lines are erased. I have a couple of hooks. I got some hangers on there. If you want to just leave them spheres, that's fine. But I also outlined the ground line and then erased all the pencil lines on there. You'll notice this one has shadows cast on the table. We'll work on that last, and those are not outlined. So you don't even have to worry about those right now. Just work on the spheres. Okay, the next step is to watercolor paint. So this is one I've done previously. Here's the trick. Each ornament's going to have just one color, and it's just going to be a flat color. We're going to go back and shade and add that curve later with crayons and colored pencils. You will not paint the little tops on there. Those are usually metal, so we're just going to leave those alone. And if you paint two watercolors next to each other, They are both wet and they will bleed together and make a big fat mess. So here's what you got to do. You got to paint one, then skip it and paint the other. So what I did here was paint the red and the blue, let those dry, and then I went back and painted the green one. All right, so you have to make sure you kind of jump and skip around, which means you can't paint them all in one day. You have to kind of paint a couple here and there. So this is a good time for you to just paint 3 or 4 solid colors. Carefully set that aside, and then you can go back and work on your pumpkins and finish those up. So you're going to have to kind of work on 2 things at one time. It may be too that, like, you know, tomorrow you find a couple minutes and you can go back and paint one more ornament. You know, whatever, if you have a little free time. So you can keep plugging them in and letting them dry until you can get them all painted.